Last week saw the latest iteration of the IORP Directive. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, we've had an IORP Directive, an EU Pensions Directive, since 2003. What the Commission are now trying to do is to produce a new version. It'll be expanded. They're aiming to harmonise regulation of pensions and financial services in general, and also to bring it more in line with the Solvency II legislation that the insurance sector now has. So it's a massive expansion that they're proposing.
So, looking at the directive that was unveiled last week, can you talk us through the key points?
Well, the two key areas that this covers are scheme governance and also communications, particularly communications to members. There had been some expectation that we would have solvency proposals for pension schemes in this, but Commissioner Barnier, who is in charge of this area of policy, postponed that work last year, but we mustn't think that's gone away entirely. But for now, the focus is on governance and communications.
So let's look at each of those in a little more detail. Starting with the governance requirements, what are the new requirements and how will these affect schemes in the UK?
Well, it's a wide range of new requirements. Schemes will have to produce a risk evaluation for pensions. That's a new risk report. There are new provisions on everything from outsourcing to risk management to audit, internal controls, fit and proper requirements as they're known for those running the scheme, perhaps trustees, and that's quite controversial. So there's a big package here of governance provisions.
And looking at the communication side of things, what will the requirements be for UK schemes? Will they be much more demanding, or are most schemes already meeting them?
Well, here there's really one proposal that jumps out, and that's the new pension benefit statement that schemes would have to send to their members, their active and deferred members. And the proposal is that this would be a two-page standardised format for the information you send to your members, the same in every EU member state regardless of what the pension system is. And as we'll come on to discuss, the directive will set out in great detail exactly what should be in those 2 pages.
And what does the directive say on funding?
Well, there are some clauses on solvency margin that have set a few hairs running and have worried some people, but those really apply to what are called regulatory own funds schemes. So that's the kind of scheme you find in the Netherlands, for example, so don't apply here. There are some concerns that the new risk evaluation report that schemes would have to prepare could just lead to solvency rules being introduced via a backdoor route. We'll have to keep a careful eye on that one.
Will there be particular requirements for the UK?
Well, there have been a lot of expectation that the Commission would change the rules on funding of cross-border schemes. At the moment, the current IORP Directive says that any scheme that operates across borders between one member state and another has to be fully funded at all times, and that's a very demanding requirement, and it's one reason why there are very few cross-border pension schemes. Now, most people had expected the Commission to change that rule in this directive, and it was quite surprising last week when they left it completely as it currently is. So, of course, as you'll appreciate, that immediately has implications for the debate about Scotland. There are, of course, lots of pension schemes that have got members both north and south of the English-Scottish border. If Scotland was to vote for independence, those schemes would immediately become cross-border schemes overnight, and so they'd have to be fully funded. And now the Commission is planning to leave that rule unchanged. That really looks like being a major consideration for pension schemes as we approach this important Scottish referendum.
One of the ideas that's been widely discussed is the requirement to provide a Solvency II based holistic balance sheet. Is this still the case?
Well, it's not included in this particular directive, at least not in the main body of it, although there is a mention in some of the introductory text. But what we know is that EIOPA, the European Pensions Regulator, is pressing ahead with the development work on this, and they've said there will be a consultation later this year in the autumn on 5 aspects of this holistic balance sheet concept. So it's quite clear EIOPA are keen to keep the pressure on the solvency agenda, and they hope to present a report with a more fully developed proposal to the new European Commission next year. So we shouldn't think this one has gone away. It will come back potentially to bite us sometime next year.
Clearly this directive provides more detail on what schemes must do. Will this put greater demands on schemes?
Absolutely. Significant extra demands. And perhaps extra cost as well, in fact almost certainly extra cost. The European Commission themselves have done some estimates of what the cost impact will be, and the figures are actually quite startling. They estimate a one-off implementation cost of €22 per member. Now we've worked that out, we reckon that's well over £200 million for NAPF members as a one-off cost. And then of course there are the ongoing annual recurring costs, and they're the Commission are saying something between 0.27 and 0.8 of €1 per member per year. Now that works out at roughly £7 or £8 million a year in sterling for NAPF member pension schemes. And bear in mind, these are the Commission's own figures. Now a cynic might say they're perhaps a conservative underestimate. We'll have to see.
So there are clearly some massive considerations from this directive, but if we look a little further ahead, what else can we expect to see coming out of Europe?
Well, there's a busy agenda, even though we're now coming up to a bit of a breakpoint in the EU institutions with elections to the European Parliament in May this year and then a new team of European commissioners appointed in the late autumn. But there's still many proposals bubbling away, some of which will be carried forward once those new teams are in place. So, for example, the financial transaction tax is still very much on the table, and it's quite likely we'll see a new version of that proposed in May. We've also got things like the money market funds regulation, which has quite significant implications for quite a lot of UK pension schemes. That's been put on hold until after the Parliament elections, but that will soon come, and we'll see the negotiations on that starting again.
And how is the NAPF working with its membership to make sure that their views are expressed and conveyed to the EU?
Well, the first thing is to make sure that we all really understand what these proposals are about, because there's a lot of quite complex detail here. So I'm working with our own EU working group and with our councils to go through these articles in some detail. It's quite painstaking work, but it's important that we do it. That then enables us to put together the good briefings for our own members to tell them what these proposals are about. But we'll also be sending those briefings to MEPs, to their researchers and advisors, and of course to the Department of Work and Pensions and the Treasury, so our government is well briefed when the ministers go to Council of Ministers meetings and bat for Britain. So really our job is to understand these proposals so we can brief anyone who's got an influence on how they might shape up in the end.
So if members would like to find out a little bit more detail, is there somewhere they can go for further information?
Yes, they can go to the policy section of www.napf.co.uk, and there in the policy and then EU section they'll find the briefings we've prepared. There's a 10-page summary which is pretty handy reading, no more than one page. For those who are interested a little bit more in the detail, and I know there are some EU anoraks among the NAPF's membership, there's a very detailed article-by-article analysis. And in fact, I'd say to anyone who looks at that, I'd be interested in their views and comments, because we're all learning what these proposals are about. So extra insights are welcome.